Okay. All right, I'll start talking about rats and cocaine here and do the lecture. Let's see if this thing this works today. Okay, so first of all, your journals have all been screened and scanned through. I've read them all, okay, over the last couple of weeks. I'm going to get back with comments. Don't worry, you're going to get comments on things. I've just needed to find the time, and tonight I have a flight to Toronto for the next few days. So I'll be doing it on the flight. Yeah, I'm taking my daughter to Toronto. That's where I'm from. So we're going to go see his grandmother. Well, it's reading week.
Oh, right.
Wednesday and Thursday are off. Yeah, because and Friday's always isn't there. There's no classes here on Friday, I don't think. Yeah, it's always off. So don't come to school on tomorrow or the next day. Oh, nice. It's too cold. You're just running away. So I'll get your journals. We can talk again about the essay next week. Let's just sort of jump into this. I've lost 15 minutes here. We have to talk today about Plato's Euthyphro. So how'd you guys find the reading? Let's say compared to the Credo or something, or any general comments. Yeah. Yeah, there's some dense moments, right? Where you're like, what? You just sing the same thing over and over in a circle. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was just a lot of
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It can and it can't, but that's the thing. Because if it were simplified, you might not get the nuance. And we'll get into the dilemma. But you're right. You're like, why can't this be simplified? Because the art of the best philosophers is to simplify as much as you can. And I think always Plato tried to as much as he could. And you'll note that there's he's not using any jargon, right? He's trying to say things over and over and over again in different words so that it lands. Because Euthyphro's like, what? And then at a certain point, he's just like, you keep telling me up is down and down, and I don't know which way to go anymore, okay, so basics. So there is drama in this story. There's a dramatic component. What is that dramatic component? What's the sort of the premise with Euthyphro? He's walking out of the Stoa or King Archon's the King Archon's porch from he's filed a what? He's filed what, as we would say today? He's filed a lawsuit against who? Yes, for what? Murder of who? A servant of hers who had done what? Yeah, and how did that servant die that the father had killed?
He was tied up and thrown into a ditch and not fed.
Right. And because the dad went to do what? He went to file his own report, file his own lawsuit, I guess, at the time. So okay, so let's just go through it slowly. So a servant, what was the first act to act? The servant had done what?
One servant got killed and killed another servant.
Yeah, he slit his throat or something quite gruesome. And then what happened? The father of Euthyphro
tied up the servant to the quarter of the other servant and threw him in the ditch. And sent another servant to the religious place to figure out what the law said to do with the murder.
Right, exactly. What we're going to do about this murderer. And then in that time, the servant died of exposure or hunger or whatever it might have been. And now Euthyphro is now going to that same place, which is the what's on the second slide here? The porch of the king, or the royal stoa. The Stoics, as you've heard of, which we won't get to in this course, but the Stoics named themselves after the porch in which they sat, which was the royal stoa at the time. They would sit there and do their talking, and that's why they got called Stoics. So, but this royal stoa was where the king archon of the time, there were 9 archons in Greece. That was just the political communities, and they would sort of circle around so that there would never be a tyrant. You know, you had 9 people. Every year it'd be a different one of these archons, the powers. And so the royal stoa was at the corner of the agora. So here you have the agora right here. And the royal stoa, like this whole area would be like the marketplace, the agora. And here you have the royal stoa up here. So you see it just, you know, it's all right in this little village that was Athens at the time. And it was the king who dealt with religious matters, importantly. You know, this wasn't a side issue. So he was going to the king archon, who is the only person who can really preside over a ruling on religious matters, because these are the highest importance in a culture that's gathered together around, of course, a pantheon of gods. Okay, so it's the religious courtroom. The king archon was the title magistrate in charge of religious cases, and this courtroom would be where Socrates would stand trial very soon, and he himself would be sentenced to death. So, of course, this isn't written before Socrates died. Plato was 19 years old when Socrates died. He was a young man. All these dialogues are written after Socrates has died, right? Now, who is charging Socrates with, because Socrates is getting charged with something too. Back up here. What's Socrates getting charged with? Corrupting the youth by
Not respecting the religion.
not respecting. Were you going to say the same? Somebody? Oh, I thought I heard. You remember the name of the guy who's accusing him of, well, pretty much, sorry? Meletus. Yeah. Who was the guy, remember when you watched that Apologia movie, that short film, the Apologia? He's one of the accusers in there. So he's in the Apologia. So Plato's throwing him in here, and we're starting to see like a backstory, like a prequel, right, to Socrates' trial. We're seeing this guy Meletus, who was, I forget which one he was. I think he's the big guy. Remember, there was 2 guys. There was like a big kind of guy with 3 chins who they would kind of like wobble when he shook when he talked, and then there was the general. So Meletus, so he's charged Socrates, so it's already on the way. It's in process. Socrates will be standing trial shortly, but in the meantime, he wants to know, and this is the Socratic mask, right? This is the irony he puts on. Oh, Euthyphro, you're being charged with, or you're charging someone with a similar crime of impiety. That's exactly what I'm being charged with. Please help me. Help me understand. And Euthyphro, incidentally, the etymology of the name means Mr. Straight Thinker. I mean, straight thinker, right? Euthry and phroneo go together to make straight thinker. So he's a man who can think clearly and straightly and get him to what he needs. So you see, all of a sudden now we're seeing the literary elements, sort of almost like Mr. Charles Dickens, right? Mr. Straight Thinking, like all these silly names almost. Of course, you don't get that when you speak English and you don't know these words, but that's what they would have meant to anyone reading it at the time. Okay, so we've described Socrates' circumstance. What is the context? So Socrates is being indicted by Meletus for corrupting the youth on a charge of impiety. That's the core theme of this dialogue, impiety. Socrates, like here nowadays, that doesn't matter, but that's everything back then, right? As we see, justice can fall under that. It can fall under the umbrella of justice. How we understand the good, etc., etc. We'll get into it. So Socrates' supposed corruption of the youth is premised around Meletus's accusation that Socrates is a maker of gods. So remember, that daemon that we always speak of, that angel or demon on his shoulder that whispers to him, as it were, you know, this is the way to the good. You know, this is your choice. Think of it as your conscience, though we will in 1 second kind of confound that understanding of conscience. And on that ground that I create new gods while not believing in the old gods, he has indicted me for their sake, as he puts it. So Socrates' daemon. So one of the questions I'll have you guys answer when we discuss this, which won't be, of course, this week, but it will follow into next, carry into next. I'll ask you to describe this daemon. It's not in the dialogue itself. I'm just adding more information. So this was an inner voice or inner genius, and we've kind of been here before, which Socrates claimed spoke to him. Sometimes it's reduced to merely an understanding of his conscience, but many people think it goes beyond conscience. It's something perhaps more mystical. It very seldomly, if at all, tells Socrates what to do. Rather, it acts more as a negative radar, okay? Indicating always what not to do, right? Whoa, that's bad, that's bad. It doesn't tell him, doesn't say that's the good. It just tells him what's bad, so that he has no other, like, so he almost takes the least worst of all possible avenues, right? Where there's that voice that's stops braiding. I mean, in some sense, that's what conscience does too. Sometimes it concerns moral actions, sometimes it does not. In other dialogues, it'll whisper in his ear other things that aren't just of moral import. Daemon eventually developed into the word demon, as I've said. However, the meaning was simply messenger or angel in Socrates' time. So all we know, and it's a great mystery of ancient Greece and of Socrates' whole persona, we don't know what this inner voice was. Any understanding we have of it will be purely interpretation, but for our sake, or for mine, I will contrive a guess that the daemon had something to do with faith, okay? A faith, a sort of trust, an eros, leading him away from those things that would distort and occlude the good towards that which doesn't. Those things which we so often see as irrational forces, but as we've seen in the Credo, the very forces that make reason work, that faith, that reason has an end. As I said to some people in office hours last week, reason on its own has no goal, right? Reason can reason can serve any goal. It can serve any master. An example you could say is World War II, and Hitler was not irrational. In fact, he was frighteningly rational, right? He put it all reason. Germany is having this problem. These people are what's causing it. This is the solution, right? It's reason, right? But it doesn't, and it's serving a certain interest, a certain reductive, let's say, understanding of one's difficulties or whatever it might be, or maybe nationalism or jingoism, and those sorts of devils. But reasoning, when we're reasoning towards another's benefit, towards the greater good, towards communities, we're reasoning toward a different goal, right? Toward the good. Whatever it is, reason has to have faith in a goal, right? It has to serve something. Reason in a vacuum is not much. It's just adding figures, right? But you see what I mean. So I would put this as some kind of faith and trust in something divine, transcendent, and that's indeed why he calls it an angel. So we talked about what the charge is. Okay, let me just read and we can break into the dialogue now. So Socrates states, what is the charge? Well, a very serious charge, which shows a good deal of character in the young man, and for which he is certainly not to be despised. Meletus says he knows how the youth are corrupted, and who are their corruptors. I fancy that he must be a wise man, and seeing as I am the reverse of a wise man, he has found me out, talking about Meletus here. Of all the political men, he is the only one who seems to me to begin in the right way, with the cultivation of virtue in the youth. Like a good husbandman, he makes the young shoots, like plant shoots, his first care, and clears away us who are the destroyers of them. This is the first step. He will afterwards attend to the elder branches, and if he goes on as he has begun, he will be a very great public benefactor. So he's saying, Meletus, the guy who's accusing, he seems very wise because his interest serves the youth, right? He's trying to weed out those impious sorts who would corrupt them, right? Who wouldn't help cultivate those young shoots as they were plants. Now, what is this an example of in our Socratic themes? What kind of mask is this? I mean, he surely doesn't believe he's impious, right? So what's he doing here?
I guess it was Euthyphro, you could say, like the mask that he's wearing that to conceal his actual like intention of just going after Socrates.
Yeah, going after Euthyphro. Yeah. So this is Socrates talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's he doing? Like, what's the psychological play here? He's doing a Euthyphro by saying this kind of thing.
He was being serious.
Well, he's being, well, kinda, like he doesn't actually think he's impious. We can't imagine so.
I think he maybe thinks that he's like, or he's trying to present like a more of a picture that he's on the side of the people. That Socrates is more like, or not Socrates, or like keep forgetting his name.
James, can you stop? Okay. Yeah.
Keep forgetting his name. The
Euthyphro. Yeah.
Euthyphro, it like presents them and him as bad as like Socrates. So
Right. Well, he's you're dancing around it. He's being ironic. This is Socratic irony, right? Because he doesn't quite. We can't assume that he thinks he's impious, right? He's confounded by this charge, but here he's trying to put himself down, in a sense, to say they must be right. They must be right. He's trying to draw out of Euthyphro a certain Euthyphro is now going to, so he can take charge, Euthyphro, of the conversation, right, as it were, right? Oh no, Socrates, you're not impious, and then he'll tell him why. So what Socratic theme is this statement an example of? Explain why. That's what I've already asked. So this is Socrates positions himself as inferior to Meletus, as he does others, conceding wisdom to those who claim to have it. In that Socrates can claim no wisdom for himself, he concedes too that he must be the corrupter of youth, as Meletus claims, for surely his ignorance has harmed them. This is therefore an example of Socratic irony. And if it doesn't have a huge effect on Euthyphro, there's a literary effect it has perhaps on us or on the readers, right? Because Meletus is actually going to be his accuser, or was. And what's kind of funny is Meletus will probably be reading this dialogue in Greece at some point. Go ahead.
But in this dialogue, he calls Euthyphro like a magnificent man and a fellow with the random place.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the dialogue, is that like part of his irony? Because then he also like is constantly destroying everything.
That's exact. So he's trying to hold on. Yeah, exactly. He's trying to, he's in the knife. He's like, you wonderful man, you must be hiding this wisdom from me because everything you say doesn't work out. So you're treating me, you're just giving me these little nudges. Give me the real deal, right? Because he's saying, but you can't mean that because that doesn't work, right? You're just putting the wool over my eyes, man. You good, great, wise man. Like it's irony the whole way through. I think what's neat about this particular one with Meletus is probably going to be reading this dialogue, right? Or perhaps you're someone like Meletus who does think Socrates corrupts the youth and is impious. So this is almost in some way to disarm you now. Oh, well, Socrates sees my point, right? So there might be a literary sort of element here meant for the reader, right? As much as for Euthyphro. So what is Euthyphro's circumstance? What is his business with the judge? So we've gone over this. So Euthyphro is prosecuting his father. Why? Because his father is reacting to the murder of one of the servants. He took the murderer, as Somia so well put it, put him in a ditch, tied him up. Well, he went to get the authorities and to find out what to do. And the man died of exposure. So there's been 2 deaths, one by the servant, and then the servant himself when the father got upset, tied him up and all that. So what might be one's, what was your earliest reaction to this? Were you for Euthyphro? It's like, yeah, well, your dad killed somebody. Or were you for the servant? Or were you like, who cares if he died? He killed somebody, were you holding any of those feelings while you're reading it?
I was like, who cares?
Right, yeah, it was of that demographic.
Murder a guy, and then your boss
Yeah.
ties you up, chucks you in the ditch, and then forgets about you.
Mhm.
Put it on.
It's on you. And then it's so weird. It's like, you're almost like, don't charge your dad for that, because your dad was doing the right thing and things went wrong. And, you know, so yeah. Manslaughter. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And then you're like, why Euthyphro? Why are you getting so upset about this? What's the big deal? It's your dad, like, it's a manslaughter. It's not.
This is slaughter.
Yeah, yeah, something like, you know, whatever. Yeah, exactly. That love that dare not speak its name. Okay, so Euthyphro is prosecuting his father for injustice. The pollution is the same if you knowingly keep company with such and do not cleanse yourself and him by bringing him to justice. Murder therefore pollutes, and only justice can cleanse. So it doesn't matter who you are, what your intentions were. Murder pollutes, it corrupts, it makes you dirty, it makes you unclean. What determines Euthyphro's feelings towards his father's conduct? Euthyphro is not emotional or shows no sentiment towards his father. There's something icily rational about his actions. Okay, this will be a hanging question in the dialogue. I'll ask, and we'll see exactly what Socrates is digging into here, because he sees it earlier than we do. You know, one might early on read something like, you know, that Euthyphro is a sorry, David, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, sort of like the thought that I had on it was that Euthyphro, like, as much as he seems to appear like morally good, his moral side does have like a bit of a corruptibility to it, because it is religious authority. And
Yeah.
I think it's a little funny how he uses religious authority to prosecute his father, right? But at the same time, sort of, I guess he doesn't really see that religious authority is used on a daily basis by the Athenians to prosecute like whoever in society, right? So like, and like some of them are not even actual prosecutions; they're just rivalry.
Right.
So I think that like he has a little bit of like kind of, I'd say, a very mellow view of like the world, like kind of that it's a lot softer, not like like the harsher reality.
Euthyphro?
Yeah.
I mean,
He's more of like an
interesting.
idealist, I'd say.
Total idealist. Great. Well put, Alex. Yeah.
Is Euthyphro like into prosecution, or is this like his first time?
Oh yeah. Did they say that they did it? He'd done it before?
Socrates just kept calling him mind.
Well, because okay, so Euthyphro, this is what this slide's about. He's a what we would call today like a theologian. He's a or a priest, or he's a religious authority himself, right? He's probably an old man, and or an elderly man, maybe in his late 50s or so, I think I say it here. But in any case, he is the religious authority in some sense. Like he's not a magistrate. He can't like the King Archon judge on the situation, but he's someone one would go to consult, right? And that's the sort of, and he's what the word is pedantic. He's incredibly pedantic, incredibly bureaucratic, right? You know, any murder, no matter what the intention, your father was obviously not trying to kill a man. He was trying to serve justice himself. But you went and you had to call him out because any murder is a stain. It's unclean. It's dirty. I mean, in some sense, okay, truly, we all have to account for anything we do. But you know, it's his own father, and he's prosecuting him with injustice, or what's the exact charge? Impiety, maybe. Go ahead.
His view, like technically, because I didn't really see it in the reading, but what was his view would be on like, I guess you could say guards and like other stuff, because like if a guy murdered someone in Athens and like a guard just threw him into a cell, which is probably like cramped and cold, and like probably has the same chances of dying as exposure as like the guy that his father threw in the ditch.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, it's like,
right.
how does it okay, for example, or it's like someone being executed for murder, right? It's like, well, the other guy performing the execution is also a murderer now. So
yeah, it's an excellent point. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. You're probably going to get, well, I don't know if prison, I mean, Socrates had a pretty swank prison, but that's because he might have been like a VIP prisoner. But yeah, it's very true. You could die very easily in these sorts of prisons. It's like throwing someone in a ditch. There's an equivalent there. Yeah. Okay. So let me just read through here. Read so make a brief character. So here in the question here, I will ask you to read through the following quotes and make a little character study of who Euthyphro is. So whenever I speak of divine matters in the assembly and foretell the future, they laugh me down as if I were crazy, he says. And yet I have foretold nothing that did not happen, right? So we see here that he's something of a religious authority, right? And he's almost a diviner, as it were. He can see what things will occur and what will happen in the future. For they say it is impious for a son to prosecute his father for murder, but their ideas of the divine attitude to piety and impiety are wrong, Socrates, right? He's very pedantic again, bureaucratic type, right? He needs to follow the rules. Like, doesn't matter if it's his father. Have you ever heard of the term of casuistry? Casuistry, one size fits all rules, in every situation. That's the rule. There's no nuance allowed. Right. So no matter what you do, whether you're lying to achieve a good end or whether you have a premeditated murder that you've been like thinking about for months and months to kill this particular person, it's exactly the same as like walking in on your lover and like murdering them by accident, in a rage, like they both need to be accounted for, but they're not equivalents, right? We would probably have more sympathy for the spontaneous rage, of finding your lover in bed with another lover. Do you want me to go on in detail of how angry you would be? Okay, so I should be of no use, Socrates, and Euthyphro would not be superior to the majority of men if I did not have accurate knowledge of all such things. So he is some kind of seer, someone with a religious, perhaps even priestly vocation. He sees himself as particularly superior for his piety and his esoteric knowledge of the gods' wishes. Esoteric, the hidden, mysterious knowledge of what the gods think. He is, according to scholars, likely in his mid-50s and probably a comfortable expert in his profession. This, of course, is the very sort of character that best stumbles into all of the tropes of Socrates' ironic style. He's going to come in and make all those sort of pratfalls into the irony. Right? He's going to speak with authority. He's going to think Socrates is a dope. He's going to think he's smarter than everyone in the room. And in that way, Socrates is totally going to pull the rug out from under him. Okay, so setting the scene, the mood, the characters, how does this dialogue unfold? The central question of the dialogue is established. What is piety, as we've established? Why is this question of central concern to Socrates, and why ought it to be a central concern to Euthyphro? And why does it appear it is not of central concern to Euthyphro? Why? Because Socrates has been charged with impiety. Though it isn't without a dose of Socratic irony, he believes that if Euthyphro could teach him what piety is, that he might better appeal his own charges, as I've said. For Euthyphro, it ought to be a central question because he is bringing a charge of impiety against his own father. He doesn't appear concerned, however, as he already knows what piety and impiety are. Right? He's bringing this charge of impiety against his own father. And what we're going to find out is that he, an authority on the matter, doesn't even know what piety means. That's what Socrates is going to show him. All right. All right. So round one here. And I break it up into 3 rounds. Okay. Where we have 3 issues in which we'll see Socrates sort of clobber Euthyphro, as it were, but in his tender, ironic way. Okay. Okay. So Socrates asks Euthyphro, what is piety? What is it? And that's the question that's going to, in these 3 rounds, that the way I'm framing it, it's going to be this question put in 3 different and tried to be answered in 3 different ways by Euthyphro, and each one is going to not stand up. Okay. Okay. So Socrates asks, what is piety? And Euthyphro proceeds to give him a first definition, namely, that piety is what he is doing, precisely what he is doing by prosecuting the wrongdoer, his father. He is being pious right now. However, is this the sort of definition that Socrates is looking for? Bear in mind, Euthyphro, then, that I did not bid you tell me 1 or 2 of the many pious actions, but that form itself that makes all pious actions pious, right? He wants that universal form, that universal definition that covers all bases of anything that's impious will fit, or anything that's pious, I should say, will fit into this definition. There's nothing that won't be captured in its breadth. So he wants that form. Okay, so we're already seeing the first a word that's going to be very important in Platonic dialogues and in the Platonic metaphysics. We're not going to go into the metaphysics really here, but form, okay? Form, definition, something that universally describes a thing, piety. So Socrates is not wishing to know an action of piety. That's what Euthyphro has just told him. He's not wishing to know what an action of piety is, or an illustration of piety, like an example of what it looks like to be pious, or some one part of piety. Rather, he wishes to know its full definition, its universal definition, a description that would suffice to describe every pious action, a definition or form that would capture every pious action by illuminating what all acts, of piety universally share, as I've said. Another way to put this is that Socrates is asking Euthyphro for the form of piety. Now, okay, so there's a little bit of logic that's helpful here to contend with. The text doesn't bring it up because Plato, thankfully, does not use jargon, okay? But we have some jargon from Aristotle to help us just understand what's been offered here and what actually Socrates wants. So extensional and intentional definitions. It's simple, don't worry. As an aside into philosophical logic, let's note some language in which we might articulate Euthyphro's first rather weak definition. That, again, well, this is pious. What I'm doing, Socrates, prosecuting my father. So the intentional meaning of a word consists of all and only those properties of characteristics that an entity must have for the word or expression to truly apply to it. For instance, a square includes the definition closed figure with 4 equal angles, or figure with 4 equal sides, etc. That captures all squares, right? More or less. Those are good. Yeah, equal. It's not rectangles too. Yeah, exactly. So that captures all squares, right? Anything that doesn't meet that definition isn't a square. Anything that falls outside of that definition, or anything that meets that definition, is a square. On the other hand, though, an extensional definition, an extension of a word or form or definition or expression, assigns meaning to a word by giving examples of what the word denotes or applies to. Put another way, they define a word by citing things from the word's extension. So extensions of the intentional definition, right? The intentional definition, that's what Socrates wants. That universal definition that describes everything. That would be the intentional definition. An illustration is just an extension. It goes out. It just illustrates that definition, right? See what I mean? So piety has some certain intentional definition that we haven't really got to yet. And all Euthyphro has done is given him an extensional definition, which is just to say an example of what piety looks like, right? Is that clear? Okay, I don't know if it's like too confusing or too easy by your faces. Okay, so what Socrates is looking for from Euthyphro is an intentional meaning that will satisfactorily include all extensions, all examples of that word piety, let's say. Again, what is the intentional meaning of piety or pious act? What is the definition which it would extend into all possible varieties of pious acts? So he's already got them here. So round one is basically, what's the definition? Oh, it's what I'm doing right now. Take a look. No, that's not. I'm asking for the form. The intentional definition, not an extension of that in an illustration. Okay. Okay. So round two here. Euthyphro presents a second attempt at a definition of piety. What is dear to the gods is pious. What is not dear to the gods is impious. So how does Socrates debunk this answer? So this is a rather simple one. So here, Socrates presupposes the polytheistic religion that most Athenians, Euthyphro included, subscribe to. If indeed the gods are often at war and disagree, then how can we suppose they agree on what passes as piety or impiety? Right? Greek, we ought to remember, is dealing with a pantheon of gods, all of whom, if you've read the Homeric literature, are fighting and squabbling over certain things, right? Athena has her own particular interests and likes, right, in the world, as does Zeus, and they're in conflict.
Yeah, that's sort of the thing that like I was trying to also like present in one of my arguments is just saying that sort of Zeus, it's kind of funny how Zeus like is defined as pious, but then like when Prometheus steals fire from him for the human, he punishes him by making him hold up the planet.
Right.
But is that really because
Atlas.
He's punishing the act of stealing, or is it because he's punishing the fact that he disobeyed and so on?
Because he's stealing, or because he's disobeying, or because fire.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm
fire.
saying. Did he punish him for disobeying him, giving the fire? Did he punish the actual act of stealing it and giving it to someone else?
Wow. No. It's. I wonder if we can drag that into this dilemma.
Where it's like sort of the
I mean, maybe it could be a variety of all of them, but yeah, you just
areas, for example, like the God of War, right?
Yeah.
Gods don't choose what they become; they're just born into a form, right?
Right.
And he was born into a form of like war, and because he's naturally like bloodthirsty and bloody, Zeus like disgraced him or disowned him as a son, right?
Right.
That's not really pious as well, just because he disowned the son for being something that he didn't choose to be.
Right, exactly. So you when you anthropomorphize the gods in all these ways, you have all this intramural fighting and squabble. It's just like any other family. So it's hard to say what is pious to the gods. So it's like, if our definition, if this great Euthyphro, who is this, religious authority, says that whatever is pious is what the gods, what is agreeable to the gods. Is that what this one is? What is dear to the gods? Then if we have Ares on one hand, who is divine, and Zeus on the other, who obviously is divine, you have, and they have different interests. They like different things, it's just, what is dear to Athena is not dear to Ares. You know what I mean, right? Like, it's just, there's no, they're not in unison, one might say. So here's, so he says, according to your argument, my good Euthyphro, different gods consider different things to be just, beautiful, ugly, good, and bad, for they would not be at odds with one another unless they differed about these subjects, right? Right? It would be these subjects upon which they differed. So this is a pretty easy argument to knock out. And, this is like, and then he'll say, like, as Sim said, you're like, come on, my good man. Wise, dear Euthyphro, you're just giving me all this baby pablum, to help me. Please give me the real deal, right? Why? Well, what is piety? So having established that some gods may love some things and some gods may hate others, Euthyphro proposes, with Socrates' assistance, of course, a third definition, that piety is what all the gods love unanimously, and that none of them hate. How now does Socrates confound this argument? Okay, so now here, this is the big confusing part of the text. If you guys read it all, and then all of a sudden there was like this huge like bottleneck traffic jam of like words being said over and over again, and you were like, where are things landing here? This is where we get into it. So having established that some gods may love, I already read that. So the definition is what all gods love and what none of them hate. So Socrates concedes, okay, maybe there's these things. So here Socrates states what will be the Euthyphro dilemma, which is a perennial philosophical problem that people are still going at today. Is the pious thing loved by the gods because it is pious? Or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? Okay, so is the pious thing loved by the gods because it is of itself pious? Or is it pious because it's loved by the gods? Do you see what I mean? So is this chair just of its nature, charged with piety, right? Is it a pious object, right? Or indeed, does it become pious once it is loved by the gods? So is it at first pious, or is it second? You know, does it come after an action? See what I mean here? Okay. Poor old Euthyphro doesn't quite understand, as probably we don't entirely either, and then there's more nuance here. So Socrates makes a preliminary explanation, namely, is something loved because it is in itself a loved thing, or is something loved because someone loves it, right? Now, the other problem, the nuance here is if it's a loved thing, who's loving it? If it's already a loved thing before, you see what I mean? Okay, so is something loved because it is in itself a loved thing, or is something loved because someone loves it? When something is carried, for instance, the property of being carried does not belong to the thing in itself, right? It doesn't do it itself. It does not make itself carried. Rather, something else must carry it, right? There's always a dynamic action there. We find that there is a difference between the determined and the determining. All right, I'm just putting it all in different words to help. So is this already been determined a pious thing? Or does someone determine it pious by loving it, as it were? And if this is already before it's determined as a loved thing by someone else, how is that the case, right? Things don't love themselves, as it were, or things don't carry themselves. There must be a reflective, or sorry, not dynamic action. Okay, we'll break it down more here. Maybe you guys all understand this, but I'm gonna go slowly and take up a couple points. So before returning to the so-called Euthyphro dilemma, what is a dilemma? Let's first ask, what is a dilemma? The etymology of this word is to lemma, two premises. Okay, there's two premises here. A dilemma are two horns of an argument, and this is usually the metaphor applied to it. Has anyone heard two horns of a dilemma? Right? No matter how hard we try, we ultimately impale ourselves on one of its horns, one or the other, right? In some sense, there's no way out of a dilemma. In a true dilemma, there are only two choices, and either choice is in some respect a bad or problematic choice, right? Saving your dog from a house fire or saving your cat, dilemma. As a human, believing that everything in the world is a living being, plant, animal, bug, worthy of love and care and appreciation, but also as a human, needing to eat, right? Dilemma, right? Whatever side you fall on, there's going to be problems. Okay, so the Euthyphro. So what is the Euthyphro dilemma? We'll break it down again here. So the dilemma in the Euthyphro emerges in this way. Socrates notes a problem in Euthyphro's third definition, that the pious thing is that which all the gods love and in which none of them hate. Okay, good. It is what they all love. But wait, says Socrates, is the pious thing loved by the gods because it is pious always already? Or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? All right, we're saying the same thing as we had before. This is the dilemma. To put this another way, what is the cause of a thing's being pious? Do the gods love a thing because it is already pious, so that an intrinsically pious thing causes the gods' love? Or is the cause of a thing's being pious the love of the gods? In other words, is it not pious until the gods love it? Or is it pious first on its own so that the gods have cause to love it? Okay, so if perhaps the language of cause doesn't work for you, let's shift. We can put this, put it in this way. Does the pious thing determine the gods' love? Or do the gods determine what is a pious thing by loving it? Again, is the gods' love determined by the pious thing, or do the gods determine what is pious by their love? I know I'm probably doing what the dialogue did to you now. Or most simply, is it a pious thing? Is a pious thing pious before the gods even arrive on the scene to notice it, as it were? Or is a pious thing pious because the gods love it? So that's so the first horn. Let's look at the first horn of the dilemma, see what the problems are, and then we'll look at the second. Okay. And again, these lectures are always these are always my lecture notes. Okay, so they're for you. They're a Cole's notes or a Spark notes for you to read over and understand our readings, hopefully in an easier way. So if you don't get all of this, and I don't know if I can really go deep into the dilemma right now with the time we have left to get through the rest of the dialogue, but it's here for you to go over, because I think I've taken different source texts using the word cause, determine, and all that to hopefully make this an easier dance. Okay, so the first horn of the dilemma. What's the problem? If the gods love a thing because it is pious, it means that there is a standard that is above the gods, right? If a chair is pious before the gods even arrive on the scene, and that they love it because, oh, there's a pious chair, it means that there's a standard above the gods, right? Who are supposed to be the divine being, maybe even creators of all things. But we're putting a chair, let's say, above them, right? Or a certain action, as in the dialogue. So there's a certain standard that is above the gods. Something determines or is the cause of its being pious that is higher than the gods themselves. Now, this is nonsense, as it supposes a higher authority to the gods than the gods themselves. Something that determines what is pious or not pious, which the gods must recognize and bow a knee to, as it were. So an example, a pious act in ancient Greece was the practice of hospitality to travelers. Zeus considered such courtesy a pious, holy act. However, if we are to favor this side of the dilemma, we see that Zeus himself does not determine this a pious act by his love. Rather, he recognizes it as a pious act beyond his own determination, so that the pious act obliges him to love it. If I believe Zeus is the height of divinity, then this is nonsensical, for I am saying that Zeus's love is determined by something higher than him. Okay, so that's how we get stuck with the first horn of the dilemma. Second horn of the dilemma. If, on the other hand, a thing is made pious because it is loved by the gods, then we get into the situation where a pious act isn't intrinsically pious and good in itself. Rather, it is made pious and good because it is made so extrinsically by the God's love. This means that nothing is intrinsically pious, and that what is pious is dependent entirely on the whims of a bunch of anthropomorphic gods, right? In other words, it is arbitrary. What's pious or impious today might be otherwise tomorrow. Stealing could be pious, rape, murder. It depends. There's no intrinsic value to anything, he's saying, right? So it's just things become pious because the gods love it, not because there's anything in it to be loved, right? So love is always a double dynamic, right? There has to be a lover and something that's worthy of being loved, but we're saying there's nothing actually really worthy intrinsically of being loved. It's just the gods go out and love whatever. You see what I mean? You see that second horn? Okay. The first one's maybe a little easier. We're putting a standard above the gods. That's problematic. Second one's a little bit more difficult. We have to understand that nothing has intrinsic value if it's not pious before the gods love it. Okay, it's not worthy of being loved, so that the god so that no love is ever really happening, because the gods are just arbitrarily being like, oh, I love that, but it's not worthy of being. It's not. It has no value of its own. It's not intrinsically valuable. So there's a problem where everything becomes kind of empty on that side, and the gods are just everything. What becomes pious is just an intrinsic imposition of a divine feeling, which we would be hard pressed to even call love, because love is, again, a dynamic movement. So this understanding of divinity is called voluntarism, right? Just pure willing, right? There's no reason, there's no logos in that chair. It's just pure, by which I mean meaning. It's just pure God's will, divine will. Voluntarism is the notion that gods are related to the world sheerly by the force of will, with no bearing on reason, logos, intrinsicness, into the world. There is no logos in this model, no reason why this is good, this is bad. It all comes down to an arbitrary divine command. Okay? Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all have followers who operate on this model, and very often it doesn't end well. These are the sort of the fundamentalist tracks, okay, where there's no true intrinsic value in the world, and there's just a willful God who is angry at one moment, jealous another, and there's no There's no deep, I guess, theological interpretation, because I mean, indeed, that is in the Bible that all three of those religions share. Jealous God, wrathful God. Anyway, I won't go down Judaism lane and Islam and Christianity. But anyway, when we don't see any logos in the world, any intrinsic worth and value, then we just have a voluntarist God of pure, powerful will, force, who makes his own arbitrary choices of who he hurts, who he doesn't, what's good, what's bad. And we've seen religions, the big religions and other sort of cultish religions, try to manipulate, like God loves sacrifice and death, and there's death cults and stuff that say like the divinity has made this pious. That's voluntary will. Anyway, okay. On which side of the dilemma does Euthyphro fall, and how does this land Euthyphro's answer back in our understanding of an extensional definition? Okay, so let's see how this goes. Euthyphro chooses the first horn of the dilemma. Okay, that we can assume there's a higher standard of God. That his problem is that he's assuming that there's going to be a standard higher and above the gods. That the gods love a thing because it is pious, thus seeking to avoid a voluntarist understanding of the deities. God's love is God loves what is pious, that which is intrinsically worthy of being loved by him. However, does this satisfy Socrates' first request for a definition of what piety is? Quote Socrates here, "You appear to me, Euthyphro, when I ask you what is the essence of holiness, to offer an attribute only, and not the essence, the attribute of being loved by all the gods. But you still refuse to explain to me the nature of holiness. And therefore, if you please, I will ask you not to hide your treasure, but to tell me once more what holiness or piety really is, whether dear to the gods or not, for that is a matter about which we will not quarrel. And what is impiety?" In other words, Euthyphro has, instead of a definition, yet that intentional meaning that we want to get of piety, Euthyphro has only given Socrates another extensional part. Piety is something the gods love, right? Just like piety is what I'm doing right now, prosecuting my father. Piety is something that gods love, right? He's just giving us another example or illustration, not an intentional meaning. This is an attribute of piety, not its definition. Okay, all right, final round here. Okay, now what is the fourth definition? This definition develops in a few steps. And forgive me for reading, so I'm reading through it because each little part's important, okay? So I know I do a little bit more glossing before, but I want to stay on the argument. The definition develops in a few steps. First, in the failure of the last definition, Socrates decides to help Euthyphro and suggests they relate piety to justice. Justice covers a wider swath of things than piety. So if we consider piety as a part of justice, perhaps a definition can be better established. So you understand what I mean here. So let's put piety as a sort of under the umbrella, the wider umbrella of justice, and perhaps that will help in some sense locate a definition. This definition develops over a few steps. Piety is that part of justice which attends to the gods. First, are there any questions, guys, before I go on? Okay. So piety is that part of justice which attends to the gods. So there's different forms of justice, there's other kinds of justice. How do we treat our neighbor? How do we treat others in business matters? How do we treat criminals in certain matters? Here, how do we treat the gods? How do we understand our relationship with the gods? Piety is that part of justice. Justice has a wide umbrella, dealing with neighbor, community, whatever, how we treat animals, whatever it is. This is that part of justice that deals with our relationship with the gods. So piety is that part of justice concerning service or ministration to the gods. It is learning how to please them in a word and deed, Piety is the art of science by which gods and men do business with one another, praying and sacrifice. So this is that part of justice where we serve the gods, we pray, we do sacrifices, says Euthyphro. Yes, and let's be clear, that's what Euthyphro says. Piety is that part of justice in learning how to please the gods through sacrifice and prayer. What, however, is the problem that Socrates perceives in this fourth definition? If piety is praying and sacrifice to the gods, that is, giving gifts to the gods, then what is this for? Of what benefit are our gifts to the gods? Do you see what's coming up here? What's going to be the issue? Yeah.
Like who are we really giving it to? Like the only gifts, like where are they going?
Where are they going? Yeah, and okay.
Also, like, I guess how they're gonna get there, because like they put it like in an offering box.
The UPS.
Bad, right?
Sure, that's not quite the issue. That is creative though. I like that. Where are these going to go, Somya?
It's like the premise is that they're perfect, so they don't need.
Yeah.
Giving them these things for a particular reason.
Yeah, a gift implies a deficiency, right? You don't have something yet, and when you get, and if gods are perfect, that's going to be the problem. So why are we giving gifts to the god? Why is this pious, right? Why is this just? What does it matter? They're perfect. Of what benefit are our gifts to the gods? Euthyphro is very quick to reply. There is no benefit to the gods, says Euthyphro quickly, right? The gods do not need anything from us. This would suggest a lack of perfection and thus hubris on our part to suppose that the gods needed anything. Okay? Thus, humans do not attend to gods in the way humans attend to animals, to care and better them, but in the way, rather, that a slave attends to his master. Okay, that's Euthyphro. All right, now let me read this this little section. So Socrates says, so being shown gratitude is what's pious, Euthyphro, but it is neither beneficial to the gods nor dear to them. I think it is dear to them above everything else, says Euthyphro. So the pious is once again, it seems, what is dear to the gods? We're back in the dilemma, right? Very much so. Socrates, are you at all surprised when you say such things that your words seem not to stand still but to move around? And you accuse me of making them move around like a Daedalus, when you yourself are much more skilled than Daedalus, even making these things go around in circles. Daedalus is the mythical guy. One of the things, he's got his story in the labyrinth with the Minotaur. He built the labyrinth for the Minotaur, but he also built all these statues that move on their own. And that's the illusion here. So all their words are standing up and walking around on their own, doing circles. Or don't you see that our discussion has gone around and arrived back at the same place? You remember, no doubt, that previously the pious and the beloved by the gods seemed to us not to be the same, but different from one another. Or don't you remember? I certainly do. And that's sort of the moment where we realize we're back where we started. So how does the fourth definition circle back into his former unsuccessful definition to describe what just happened there? It is deemed that piety is attention to the gods through exchanges of prayer and sacrifice. However, it cannot be established what the gods' aim are in this exchange because, again, they're perfect. Do they benefit? Do they gain? If it is hubris to suggest that anything can possibly be of benefit to perfect beings, then it is dubious in what way piety can be dear or loved by them in any way that means anything. Euthyphro again is trapped and makes the assertion that indeed the pious is dear to the gods. Okay, but this lands him back in the third definition, and we've seen the problems there. Okay, so Dunzo. Euthyphro exits promptly. But Euthyphro, you have only gone around in a circle and have not explained piety at all. Gotta go now. Okay, so so what has happened in this dialogue is that, okay, I'll ask you, have any masks been taken off? What are the two movements of the dialogue that we talked about in the figure of Socrates reading and last week with Crito? What Socrates wears his mask of irony, but at one point, what happens? Hopefully, ideally.
Well, I guess,
Oh, Matteo, just because he hasn't said anything yet, or in a little bit. Well, he takes it off, and yeah, he takes it off, and yeah, he shows his well, he's been showing his intelligence the whole way, different ways. David.
he plays more like, he shows his intelligence, yes, but he plays more like the ignorant, like, I guess you could say, person who wants to be the student or taught by him, because he sees him as like a religious authority, but he uses that prosophone for him to expose his ideas so he can then challenge on them.
Right. So he can challenge exactly. And what? So yeah, and the general movement is he takes off his mask. He takes off precisely what you described there, and he utilizes his intelligence in a different way. Now he says, "Okay, masks off," but he doesn't take off that mask of irony. He doesn't take off that naivety until the person accepts that they're absolute ignoramuses. Right? He has to get to that point. Remember Crito last day when Crito was like, "Oh, yeah, no, I don't know what's going on, man. Can you help me?" You know, he gets to the end. He doesn't know what the good is anymore, what the just act is. Euthyphro here never gets to that point, right?
Like, I remember at one point he literally says, I think his words that, words are that, doesn't understand Socrates' understanding. How come Socrates doesn't become his master?
Because Euthyphro hasn't taken off his, as it were. He hasn't realized he doesn't know anything. He's more accusing Socrates of making his words dance around, right? And being somewhat sophistic, I guess you could say. But he himself isn't like, he hasn't taken off the mask and been like, oh, I don't know what piety is, in the way Crito very vulnerably was just like, I don't know, Socrates, teach me, right? So there's still a lot of posturing going on, and Euthyphro exits, right? And that's with all our friends, when we have little debates, at some point something's got to give on a side, or we get to these impasses, and it's not your job to hold up that I thou relationship between somebody who can't ultimately come your way, right? Don't expect, if a conversation goes sour, it's because probably someone hasn't come halfway to meet the other. And that's precisely Socrates, the problem with this dialogue. It's truncated, right? We're not guided out of the cave, as it were. And we'll talk about the myth of the cave later. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so unlike the Credo and unlike the Meno next week, where we're going to see that movement of the mask taken off, and the Meno is probably one of the more beautiful ones, and we'll see in that respect. So what does dialectic mean? So these dialogues are what you call dialectical. Dialectic is central to Plato's Socratic dialogues and central to philosophy as a whole, and perhaps to most conversations we have. The basic structure of a dialectic: someone presents a truth claim or definition. In preparing an answer, the conversation partner considers contradictions inherent in the claim, incoherencies in the claim, oppositions, opposite views from that one would suppose. The partners respond back and forth to one another in this way, over and over. But do we ultimately reach an end in the dialectic? The idea is no. We can keep going. We can keep discussing things on and on, and that's the philosophical conversation over and over. An inference we might make of the Socratic dialogues is that there is no anti-dialectical body of knowledge. Every claim can be met with contradictions, incoherencies, and counterpoints of view that shift the premises of our understanding. But if there's no anti-dialectical body of knowledge, then doesn't that mean there is no real, coherent, fixed truth we can seize upon? Aren't we saying that there is no truth? No. Again, Socrates is not a relativist. He's not just trying to make a nihilist of us or of Euthyphro in this dialogue. He believes there is truth and reality, but is always aporetic. And now I don't have time to get into this. So I'm going to have to perhaps I'm just going to have to cancel it out because we don't have a next day for this course for this week. So I'll bring in the aporia and aporetic dialogues a little bit later, but no, I've got 2 minutes. I'm going to do this last slide at least. Just because I want you to know it's a certain kind of dialogue here. So what does aporia mean? By calling the Euthyphro an aporetic dialogue, have we discovered that the concept of piety is actual nonsense, right? Because that would seem to be the case, that there is no definition to piety, or that piety isn't anything at all. That's what a sophist would do, but that's not what Socrates is trying to do here. Aporia means uncertainty. The aporia in Euthyphro is over our understanding of the virtue of piety. It may seem that a pious act cannot be defined in any intentional way, in a way that pertains to all instances of it. It cannot be reduced to some one single understanding that will lend it utter certainty. However, does this lead us to believe that Socrates doubts that any such thing as virtue of piety exists? By no means. Socrates comes to no such conclusion. Indeed, he earnestly pursues an understanding of it. It's just that, okay, I need to tell you this. Okay, sorry. Okay, so where does piety happen in this dialogue? So let's put on our literary goggles to see. In another sense, we might say that Socrates indeed is acting piously himself. He is the act of piety in this, not Euthyphro. In his noble pursuit of logos, of reason, of daemon, of the divine spark which guides him, he will not get distracted, nor will he accept any lazy half-ass answers. If one is to know a thing, one ought to know it sufficiently and entirely before we take our fathers to court over it, for sure, and hurt ones we love. So this is the piety that Euthyphro evidently falls short on. His hubris is to accuse his father of a crime of impiety when he himself cannot even say what piety is. And that's a horrible hubris to be enraptured by. So intellectual hubris thus takes pride of place over familial bond, the love of a father and a son. And Socrates, if we are to read the fine print, thinks this is highly unreasonable and therefore impious. Because reason, following the daemon, the good, is piety for Socrates. Not following reason, not following logos, not following true meaning, right, is to be impious. And that's precisely what Euthyphro is doing, and what he can't admit is what he's doing. What these aporetic dialogues should move us toward is not a relativism or a nihilism. Rather, they should move us toward a humility, particularly in the face of significant undertakings like Euthyphro's. Our presuppositions and apparent certainties can bring others to harm. They can make us act unjustly, irrationally, and indeed impiously. Okay, guys, any questions? I know we're a minute over. Sorry for being rushed. I had 15 minutes at the beginning where we didn't quite start. That's my fault. I should have reined us in. Can I, is there anything I can address before? Okay. You're all good? I've got about 10-15 minutes of office hours, okay? Today, because I got to run to the airport. So, but if you want to come, if you have anything to say, come on up, see me. All right. Take care, guys. Have a good week. Enjoy reading week.